It used to be, remember going to bowling alleys and you'd have people smoking?
Yes.
Well, there was a man who called me and he said, I'd love to go bowling with my grandson, but he has asthma. So I said, wait a minute, we're telling people they can't smoke in restaurants, but they're smoking in bowling alleys? So that was my law that banned smoking in bowling alleys.
So there's a connection there.
Well, it's about listening, right? If you're a legislator and you listen to people, well, the legislators don't come up with all these ideas. It's the public who says, you know, this is what we need and this is what's happening.
Well, I don't know if any of you have listened to Vivian already and heard her story, but for those of you who haven't, I'm going to give a quick introduction. Vivian's no stranger to public service. She's one of a few candidates in the race who's actually held public office, having served on the Suffolk County Legislature representing the 5th Legislative District for 13 years. She was born in the Dominican Republic. She became an American citizen at 18, and for almost 50 years now has called Suffolk County her home. In addition to being a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a teacher, she is a candidate who promises to speak truth to power. So thank you for joining us, and please welcome Vivian.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out on a rainy night.
It is a rainy night. I'm glad everybody got here safely. So I'll start with a question that I kind of like to ask everybody because it builds a nice foundation for our conversation, which is what sparked your interest in public service?
I was the Sunday school teacher at a Unitarian Universalist fellowship of my legislator's son.
Okay.
And so she and I would talk about, UUs are very much interested in social justice issues and community service aspect of UU. And so Nora Bredis was my legislator, and her son was in my class, in my Sunday school class. And so we would talk about things that were needed in our community. I put together the first breast cancer walk in our area in Stony Brook because of the whole 1 in 9 was in the news all the time, remember, and it was a big concern. Yeah. And Nora helped me with that as my legislator, but I was the chair. It was great when I wrote that first check. So there were so many things that we did together. And Nora's husband, his career required that he move, and she had to leave her post early, and she asked me to run. And we talked about it. I have been doing community service my whole life. I did it as a teenager. My first, for those of you who are of a certain age and you might know anything about New York City politics, Mayor Robert Wagner gave me my first citation. So it was quite a while ago. It's always been part of my DNA, I guess. I just like public service. And Nora asked me to run, and it was a rather strange year in my life. My mother had been hit by a car and died a month later from the injury. And then my sister died that February. And you really get a sense of it. You get existential questions, you know, examining your life. And I thought, well, maybe this is coming at the right time. And I was just turning 50. And I thought maybe it's a time. I've been serving kids my whole life as a teacher. Let me see if I can stretch my wings and do the greater good and make a bigger difference.
It's always nice to hear too of women helping women, and it sounds like this legislator was leaving, and she kind of mentored you to fill her shoes in a way.
Yes, and when I would, and you know, because you know that you're term limited, which I believe in term limits. I knew I was term limited, and so I hired a woman, Kara Hahn, to work in my office because I had seen her good work in the community, and she's now the legislator.
That's right.
So you do pass it forward, and I think succession planning is very important, and term limits lets you do that because you know when you're going to be up. And so I planned it so that a really good woman is up there.
So that's why you ran for your first legislative term. Tell us, why did you decide to run for Congress this year?
I went to visit Lee Zeldin. That'll motivate you to run. Well, you know, I was out there with all the other women right after the, election. Mm-hmm. It was a punch in the gut. And so I was out there. My friend and I made 10 hats to wear. My daughters wore them, my friends wore them, and we were all there, and we saw that sense of almost desperation. It was exciting, it was energizing, but there was a desperate feeling to it because there was such a sense of loss for so many of us, because we couldn't believe that this is what our country had chosen, that this was the direction our country was moving in. And you know, we saw a kind of preview to that in England with the Brexit and that kind of anger at the other. And so I went to visit Lee Zeldin when the Congress was contemplating the first Health Care Act. I spoke with him, and he spoke to me in sound bites.
How'd you get in there? None of us can get in there.
Oh, well, I was a legislator. So I called his office and said I wanted to see him. I said I was going to be in Washington, and told him when I would be there. And he gave me quite a bit of time. He gave me over an hour of time. And we did talk, and he's a very pleasant, disarming person. If anyone has spoken one-on-one with him, he's very pleasant. He's really polished. He's been well groomed, and so he spoke in these talking points. And having just seen the rollout of a budget, and you know, your budget is your policy statement. Healthcare they were trying to abandon our ACA. They had cut NIH, National Institutes for Health. They were cutting the EPA, energy, research grants, arts and sciences. They were even cutting funding going to Meals on Wheels. I mean, you have to have a heart. And we were losing our heart. We were losing arts and sciences, and we were losing our heart. So I called my husband and I said, I really need to run. And he said, go for it. And that's when I decided to run.
So was this like over the summer? And who had been in the
It was
race
in the
already?
spring.
It was in the
Nobody
spring.
else was in.
Nobody else.
Nobody
Were you
else.
the first one to declare your
I was the
candidacy?
first one. I
Oh,
was
I
the
didn't
first one
realize
to
that.
file with the FEC. I decided back in April. I went to visit Rich Schaefer, and he said, you know what, you go ahead and do what you're doing and see where it goes. And I started working back in April. I had my first house party in May in East Hampton. So, and I've been working ever since.
So tell us a little bit about your campaign then. Who makes up your team, and how are you leveraging their strength to help you win this primary?
Well, I have those two terrific guys in the back who are absolute geniuses with crunching numbers and getting the word out on Facebook, and we were almost invisible until they came on board. So they're a great help. I have Tony Coates, who ran the Laura Jen Smith's race in Riverhead and was victorious. So when her campaign when she won, I gave him a call, and he's joined our team. I have a young man by the name of James Buchlis, he's an attorney, but he's doing a lot of our field work, pulling it together. Karen comes and brings great cookies. And she does a lot of very good research for me. She's a great researcher. She was a social studies teacher and does great research. So we have a good, strong team. We have quite a few people working on our field operations. We have the person who coordinates all my parties, the meets and greet. So it's a good team.
So what have you learned from the past, having run campaigns where you've won elections, run campaigns where you've lost elections? What have you learned from both of those that are going to help you win the primary?
That's a very good question, and I have learned a tremendous amount. And what we need to do is make sure we keep our ear to the ground and know what's happening everywhere. And I ran a county-wide campaign. I ran for clerk, and it was about grassroots. It was about getting that army of volunteers who are going to go out there and petition. I knock on doors. I knock on doors a lot. And although this isn't a race that you win by knocking on doors because it's just too big, I will be knocking on doors. And I knocked on doors all of September because I wanted to let people know that if they were going to help me win a primary, they would have to change their registration to Democrat. And so there were quite a number of people, over 100 people, who changed their registration because I knocked at their door. So you work, and you work. And I love that because you're interacting with people, and I like interacting with people. And There are many people who know me from my legislative days.
So in addition to knocking on doors, you know, you're someone who's lived in the district, you've served the district. What else is it?
I understand that the big issues that we have in our district start with pocketbook issues. We have very high taxes. We need to have, to buttress up our economic development. I worked on this as a legislator because my bailiwick was the environmental area. I did a lot of environmental work. And you find that environmental advance and economic sustainability are not mutually exclusive, which sometimes the other side tries to say that if you're saving the environment, somehow you're going to be hurting economic development. What we have to see is that environmental protection can grow, can incubate, can nurture great jobs right here at home and industries right here at home. You know, my husband and I were one of the first homes that had a solar roof, and I did a lot of work with Rely, with Gordon, Rocky, and Rely. And now our solar industry, I don't know if you saw it in today's paper or heard it on the news, has dropped this year from last year, and it had been on an upward swing. Why? Because of the tariff. Okay, so the costs are more expensive and the local economy is hurting. So we have to think locally, think globally. So what I'm bringing to Congress is that vantage point of seeing how decisions made in Washington have a direct impact on our economy, our sustainability, and our future.
I'm glad you brought up the economy and jobs, and I definitely want to talk more about the issues, but while we're still talking about primary stuff,
Sure.
I want to ask you a question that I've asked everybody so far, and I'll
Yes.
continue to ask the other candidates, which is that no Democrat has ever won a primary in this district and then has gone on to win the general election, which has made a lot of people here scared to have a primary.
Mhm.
I would think that you would agree that a primary is a sign of a healthy democracy.
I think it's the, my social studies teacher friend over there says it's the purest level of a democracy, where you have the people gathering signatures, going out there, knocking on doors, building up that grassroots and voting for the person of their choice, rather than having it done in smoke-filled rooms.
Correct. So what do you think that we need to do to break that cycle? I mean, there is going to be a primary, it's unavoidable, somebody's going to win. How does that somebody then go on to beat Lee Zeldin?
Well, I'll tell you that the way we break the cycle is by my winning the primary.
Every candidate, every time.
No, I'm kidding, but there's a seriousness to what I'm saying. We have 7 people who are running for this race, and everyone brings a different talent. And I really believe that we have to keep the judgment and the choice in the hands of the people. We've seen party leaders beginning to put the thumb on the scale, and I find that offensive, because we're all out there working hard to get our message out there. I believe that it's time for Democrats in Suffolk County to believe in the democratic principles. I served in the legislature for 13 years, and I saw too many people being embarrassed about being Democrats. We've also had almost 2 decades here in Suffolk County of a phenomenon which stole people's franchise. We've had county-wide elected officials endorsed by both major parties and 2 third parties. That is a great depressor of the vote. If one sees that there's no one that they can vote for, or that their vote makes no difference with the treasurer, the county executive, the comptroller, the sheriff, the DA, and the clerk. I ran against Judy Pascal and lost by 2 points. So it would have seemed to me that that would have been great territory for a good challenge, and yet she was cross-endorsed over and over again.
So what's that about?
I can't speak for what decisions are made behind the doors that I don't peek behind, but it seems it's the easiest route for people to just make deals, and they'll make a deal like this because they want a certain person to be a judge, and they want that judge to be,
Is it about control?
it's very short-sighted. It's very short-sighted because it's hurt our electorate here in Suffolk County. When you disenfranchise the voter, and the voter doesn't see a reason to get up and get to the polls, because as you look down the line, everyone is your vote doesn't matter. I carry petitions every year. I've been a committeeman for a long time. And when I go to a door and someone sees that someone is on, that someone they know is a Republican is on my petition, I don't sign that petition, so I don't try to convince them to sign that. I don't sign a petition for someone who's on all the lines, because I don't think they need my vote, and I don't know if I trust their judgment. If you can call yourself a Democrat and a conservative, and a Democrat and a Republican, then what do you stand for?
Well, that's interesting. You actually recently earned the endorsements of Carahan and Valerie Cartwright. Are you actively looking for endorsements? And if so, where? From who?
Well, I've started with, I do have an endorsement from the Free Thought Citizens. I forget the rest of their title, but it's people who don't want to have religion used as a hammer in politics, in the political arena.
Are they local?
They're national, but they're small.
Okay.
But I believe in their message, especially when you have something that Mr. Zeldin supported and co-sponsored, which was the FADA, which was the First Amendment Defense Act, which is the defense of those people who, because of their religion, might not want to bake a cake for someone who is celebrating a same-sex marriage. Or if someone is a pharmacist and refuses to sell birth control pills to an unmarried woman. That's an intrusion of religion. I mean, it's not a theocracy here, and I find that a very offensive type of thinking. And when you make one of the divisions of Health and Human Services to be the protection of religion from having to serve those who they find offensive to them on a religious basis, it's chilling. It's truly chilling. So I certainly will work very hard in Congress to overturn that type of direction, to turn it around.
How about fundraising? You're gonna have to, if you win the primary, you're gonna have to go up against big money.
And actually, I think it'll be easier once I win the primary than it is right now.
Tell me why.
Well, because right now there's the sense that the party leader is supporting one particular candidate. And many of the people who supported me in the past when I was a legislator is that we're talking about the same cohort. And so I'm calling and not getting returns when I had gotten them when I was in the legislature. So it's hard to raise money right now. And people are concerned, the donor is concerned about investing too much when there's a primary. I've spoken to women who supported Anna Throne-Holst. And then said, well, I donated all this money, and then she lost the election, and the primary took up so much of it. So people are shy.
For now.
People in Suffolk County are shy right now.
Didn't you introduce a law about campaign finance in Suffolk County?
Yes, more than once.
Yes.
More than once. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I did introduce campaign finance laws.
Yeah. Before we move on, tell us, if you're not victorious in June, will you support whoever is?
No,
Tell us why.
I cannot support Kate Browning. I cannot support her because I'm not saying that I'm going to work against her, but I'm a woman. Kate Browning was a member of the Right to Life Party. She did not leave the party. The party was dissolved because it didn't get the gubernatorial votes to remain a viable party. She didn't come into the Democratic Party. She went to the Working Families Party and only became a Democrat opportunistically in order to run. I had a safety perimeter legislation, and she voted against it. I am an immigrant, I'm a Latina, and I served while Steve Levy was our county executive, fear-mongering and creating a true environment of hate in Suffolk County. And he had several pieces of legislation. He introduced several pieces of legislation which I fought very hard against. And Kate voted for his legislation that was very harmful to the Latino community. I found it offensive. I voted against it, and my life was threatened because of it. Before I walked out of that auditorium, I was called a spick, and there was a truck parked in front of my house for 5 hours with placards saying that I was a traitor, that I should be deported, that I support criminals, because this is how Latinos were being characterized in Suffolk County as criminals. That's shameful, and I cannot support somebody who supported that. I just can't. It's immoral for me to support that. Kate introduced legislation that would require anyone who bought a prepaid cell phone to have to register with the DA's office. ACLU, almost every pastor and rabbi and priest that I know who had an active parish or congregation was in the auditorium when that bill came up. Sepa Mujer, who represents women in court, to whom I have given grants because it was such a worthy cause. Kate wouldn't talk to them. And these women were saying, you are going to expose victims of domestic violence if they have to register. So this was against immigrants, it was against people of color, it was against poor people, it was against women. So, you know, I've always been a team player, but I've never been a hypocrite. I cannot vote for someone to be the Democratic representative of our community in Congress when I don't believe that that person stands for any democratic principles.
I could push back for a second.
Sure.
There's a quote that I really like, which is, you fall in love during a primary, and you fall in line during the general. And I want to ask you, or will you not vote? Because we'll have two choices, and it's Ms. Zeldin and whoever wins the primary.
Now, you asked me if I would support her. You didn't ask me if I would vote for her.
Okay, so.
So I hope that I won't have to hold my nose, and I hope that all of the good people who are progressive Democrats won't be asked to hold their noses when they go to vote. And I wrote that to Rich Shaver a couple of days ago. Saturday night, I wrote him an email and I said, you're putting us in the position where women, where people of conscience, where people who believe that our values are important, you're putting us in a position of saying to Democrats, we think she's the most electable, so just hold your nose. I think we've heard that before.
If Kate doesn't win, you'll support whoever does?
Yes.
And does that mean throwing your resources, your strength behind that candidate too?
Absolutely. I will walk, I will knock on doors. Because I feel that, you know, we almost have a collegiality among us. We were at a forum once, and it was either David or Perry who was saying something, and then when it was my turn to answer the question, I said, I better learn how to be a better opponent. I keep nodding my head as he speaks. Because we're talking about wanting universal health care. We're talking about standing up for immigrants. We're talking about the deplorable Muslim ban that I stood at Stony Brook University with the kids, graduate students and undergrads who were waiting for friends to come back to school, who they didn't know they would come back. And I wore a headscarf in solidarity with the Muslim people there at Stony Brook. I've stood with too many people who have too much at stake during these past 6 months. I've stood with with scientists, with environmentalists, with sick people who say we need health care, with women. The list goes on, and I've stood there with all of them. I can't stand with all of them and then say, I'm gonna vote for someone who hasn't stood with you on these important issues.
So let's talk about those issues. On paper, everybody seems to be the same, and I think that what really is gonna separate people out in this primary is not where they stand on the issues, but their solutions to get us where we need to be, their ideas to implement those solutions. So let's start with everybody's favorite, which is jobs. You support sustainable energy projects that'll move jobs into the future. What does that look like, and how do we get it done?
Well, I can tell you how very quickly, because I don't want to spend a lot of time in what I have done, but when I introduced my lead legislation, which was building green buildings, okay, the building trades unions were very concerned about that. They said, you're gonna hurt us, it'll take longer to build, et cetera, et cetera. I worked not only with the environmentalists, I worked with the workers. I went to the union breakfast 3 months in a row to talk to them about how these principles were going to be best practices. So what you need to do is you try to bring the technology and the workers' needs. You know, you don't go to West Virginia and say, we're gonna have more coal mines. That's cynical, it's ridiculous. You need to go there and say, look, if you're worried about robots, if you're worried about AI taking over your job, how about let's training you on how to build robots? Let's talk about how we can bring technology that might replace you become the technology that you will be creating. Okay, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to make sure that when we have IDAs, industrial development agencies, when we have tax breaks, that we're very vigilant that there's a return on our investment as taxpayers. We have to make sure that there's a clawback if those companies that are promising to provide jobs are indeed providing jobs, and that we have a return back into our economy. It's very important to understand that there is a payback factor in many different types of jobs. For example, we know that we have an aging population. We have an aging population that's going to have greater need for people to take care of the aging. These are not high-paying jobs. We should make them higher-paying jobs. I do believe in raising the living wage, raising the minimum wage so that it's a living wage. But when you have a person who's making $15 an hour, those $15 come right back into our local economy. If you have someone who is running a big investment firm and making $500,000 a year, that $500,000 isn't a one-to-one factor coming back into your local economy. So we must celebrate and encourage all levels of jobs. It's an important piece to understand, which means that we don't say that everyone must have a 4-year college degree and that's the only supporting. We must support training for people to be the nursing students. You have RNs and you have I forget the acronyms, but the LPNs. So you have all different levels. I just came from well, I'm not going to go into that, but you can understand what I'm saying, that you need to support jobs at all levels. You need to celebrate jobs at all levels. And understand that there's training. Look at us, look at our tourism industry here. We should have hospitality training for our kids here. We shouldn't have to be importing kids from Europe to work here in the Hamptons in the summer, right? Why aren't we training our own kids to do that? Hospitality industry is a tremendous industry. And we need to educate provide the opportunity, think about our future rather than hearkening to the past, and give people opportunities.
Seems like something like infrastructure is something that's really supported on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. And I just wonder if there is a blue wave in 2018 and you can secure money to bring back to this district, what would you use it for in terms of the environment and the economy? I want to know specifically what that looks like.
Wow. Well, you know, when we had the stimulus, remember how the Republicans beat Obama up about that stimulus money? We had some crumbling bridges here that needed some work. So we put contractors and construction workers back to work that they had lost because of the housing crisis. So we did put construction workers right back in there. We have a windmill that's going to be built by a Norwegian company. Why? Because we haven't kept up with sustainable energy in this country, and we haven't invested in sustainable and green energy in our country. And so I remember in 2000 when I was first elected and I was trying to get wind energy here, and we were trying to get solar energy, and we were looking at Denmark. At that time, Denmark was already 12% of their energy was coming from wind energy. And I was laughed at. Someone actually called me Don Quixote. But I was a Spanish teacher, so I was thrilled. But, you know, just keep looking forward, because we don't know what's right around the corner. You know, Musk is taking his Tesla up there. So we don't know what's around the corner. Who could have imagined the iPhone 15 years ago, 20 years ago? So look around the corner. Keep talking to people. It was because I put an energy policy committee together that I learned about lead legislation. Someone came to a public hearing and talked about it. And when I talked about it with my colleagues, no one else had heard about it. In fact, my legislation was duplicated in counties all over the country because I was the first county official in the country to introduce lead legislation mandated on the county level. So what I'm saying is curiosity, imagination, and a willingness to learn, and then applying that to what's needed. So I know you asked me what would I do, and I'm saying that the future holds many options for us, and that we have to keep ourselves open to what is needed in our economy. And I was there on the Workforce Housing Commission when Paul Pontieri started to bring his proposal about what he was doing in Patchogue. And so I supported his efforts, and look what he's done. Because he had vision and courage, a lot of courage.
You also talked about being a supporter of raising the minimum wage. I think a lot of people out here own small businesses, and when a lot of those small business owners hear that the minimum wage should be raised to $15, there's a fear there that will cause their small business to go out of business. What do you say to those small business owners?
Data has shown that small businesses aren't generally running out of business, going out of business when the wage goes up. So we have to look at the data and not on fears of what's going to happen. The data must be examined, and the data doesn't verify that fear. It doesn't support that fear.
Unfortunately, a lot of the times the worker is pinned against the business owner, and it's an unfair thing to do.
On the other hand, when someone is working 40 hours a week and their rent takes up more than 50% of what they're earning, that's not sustainable for that person. And we have to begin to look at every member of our community as having value and wanting hard work to pay off for them.
While we're talking about jobs, and then we can move on, you created a Welfare to Work Commission.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you know, when you hear about welfare to work, you think of a punitive measure, right? That people were forced out of welfare into work. But what we did in Suffolk County with my Welfare to Work Commission is we made it a conduit for people to move from welfare to work. And what we did was we dealt with many of the impediments to going from welfare to work. Most of the women who are poor and on welfare are single mothers. So we're talking about hungry children, and we're talking about women who are finding it difficult to get to work. So one of the greatest hurdles is childcare. And so we worked with, childcare vouchers. We worked for reduced bus fare for women. I also supported the domestic, the displaced homemaker program that some of the money came in from New York State, helping women to write resumes, how to look for a job, training, and we partnered with Dress for Success. We created a support system. We also advocated for women, for families going from welfare to work, regarding, I'm trying to think of the different ways, it was many initiatives, helping them with getting food stamps because people are working and they don't have enough money for food, advocating for them when they faced rental discrimination. And that was very near to my heart because my mother had a Spanish accent. And when she called to look for an apartment, she put my sister on the phone because if they heard the Spanish accent, the apartment was not available. And that happens here in Suffolk and in other places. So we would advocate for women. So it was, I'm very proud of that. And the Welfare to Work Commission is still doing great work and doing great research because it wasn't just, we're not just bleeding heart liberals. We also look for the data, look for the research, and support our findings and support the support that we give people.
Mm-hmm. As an immigrant, I'm excited to talk to you about immigrant issues, specifically the Dreamers. You support passing a Clean Dream Act. You are against local law enforcement acting as lackeys for ICE agents. You are for passing comprehensive immigration legislation. What does that mean specifically, and are there current laws or processes that are already on the books that you support that you think just need to be either enforced better or otherwise?
Well, the comprehensive immigration is really very complex. And of course, I'm concerned about President Trump speaking to what he calls the chain migration, where right now, someone can bring in a relative.
Right.
So we certainly want to maintain that in our immigration policy. We also want to have a clear road to citizenship. We need that. We need a clear road to citizenship. The first thing we have to do is to keep the promise that was made to tens of thousands of young people who outed their family, who gave all of the information about their families, who have jobs, who are in school, a lot of students at Stony Brook, who will lose their ability to continue their education. So we have to fulfill the promise to the Dreamers. And we have to protect the parents who the young people have exposed during their application process. That must be protected. So I want to look at the agreements that are coming up to see where I stand with I don't want to give anybody $25 billion to build a wall. That's a waste of money, that's a waste of time, and it's cruel and it's xenophobic. Are there some concessions that I would make as far as the border is concerned? I would probably have to, because I want to protect the immigrants, and I want there are too many people that have died in deserts because of our immigration policies.
Yeah, let's talk about that more, because as we speak, poor Nancy Pelosi is standing on the House floor
For
talking.
6 hours,
Yeah.
7 hours now, she's
And
still talking.
She's done.
Did she stop?
Well, you know, people were very critical of Chuck Schumer last week and you know, for giving in a little too soon as they saw it. It's not about whether or not I agree. I'm just wondering, where would you have stood on that issue? Where do you stand on it now? And what compromises do you think should be made in terms of getting a Clean Dream Act passed, which is not in the bill that Schumer, or in his proposal right now? Doesn't include dreamers.
We have to include dreamers.
And at what cost is really the question.
You know, Mr. Trump yesterday said that he was happy to see the government shut down. I wouldn't be happy to see it. It wouldn't be good for anybody. But what happened with Chuck is a smart man, and so is Nancy's a smart woman, and yet they were trapped by the Machiavellian plot by the Republicans to unfund CHIP, so that CHIP funding would have to be revisited and wrapped into the deal with DACA. And if DACA were a part of that deal, if the Democrats held out for including DACA, then the ploy was they're putting immigrant kids before American kids.
Right.
So,
Actually, immigrant kids are included in CHIP.
but their message was they're putting, we know that, but the message, the Machiavellian game that was played, they played us. They played us, and it was such bad theater and politics for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi
So what would you have
I think I would not have been able to maintain the shutting down the government longer than they did. I think it would have hurt all of us in the 2018 elections. It was just, it was horrible, it was heartbreaking, but we have to, at this point, because the Congress is not moving forward with it, now we have to stand fast and not vote on anything until we have a DACA assurance for those dreamers. And you know, over 80% of the country is with us, maybe 90% of the country is with us on this. But at what cost? That's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
But I think we have to stand firm on protecting the dreamers. We have to.
There's a lot to talk about regarding Lee Zeldin, but I want to give you an opportunity to critique him specifically on demonizing the whole of our immigrant neighbors by constantly linking immigration discussions with gang violence on Long Island, specifically MS-13.
I wish I had my sheet on all of his legislation, because he has that Alien Violence Act that he's supporting, which is again criminalizing all aliens. His MS-13, nobody wants gangs, least of all the Latinos who live in those neighborhoods. Okay, I lived in a project that had gangs, and the immigrants are the ones who are hurt the most. The people of color are the ones who are suffering the most. So it's fear-mongering. Look, this isn't the first time that Lee Zeldin is doing this. I saw the first time he ran against Tim Bishop, and this was certainly the centerpiece of his campaign, was going against the immigrants and calling them criminals. And yet we have the data that shows the kind of economic impact, the positive economic impact that immigrants have on a community. The positive impact. Now, what happens if you take these immigrants and take them out of the shadows and allow them to open up small businesses? And because that's the entrepreneur, is, you know, we see people who are, there are a number of Turkish immigrants who own businesses in my neighborhood. We see that's been the history of our country. that it's the hungry immigrant who's looking for opportunity, who's going to stimulate our economy. And that's how we built our economy. We built our country on the shoulders of immigrants. And so all of his fear-mongering, and of course, the Trump using the parents of these murdered children as his props, it just was disgusting. And we have to be tough on gangs. If someone has murdered someone and that person is here illegally, that person has to be deported. You know, we don't want that person here poisoning the well for all of the hard-working. I was a volunteer ESL teacher after I was term limited. And these people would come after working all day. These guys, I could smell the shampoo and soap on them because they'd be working all day and they'd run and take a shower. Their hair was wet when they came to my ESL class at night. And I had buy reflectors because they didn't have cars. So I'd get reflectors for them so they wouldn't get killed driving home, because they got darker and darker as the summer went on, and they're driving at night, riding a bike at night. I'm sorry, I'm getting too long-winded, but you have to be on the ground and see the people that you're dealing with. And these people, Zeldin is so isolated from who immigrants are, because it serves his purpose not to look in the eyes of the human beings that he's denigrating and punishing for a partisan agenda. So.
Yeah, it's a shame. I have a few more questions for
Sure.
you, and then we're going to turn it over to our members. Another question that I ask everybody who comes here: are you a feminist?
Yes.
Yes. As a feminist, if elected to Congress, would you be an ally to the women's movement by being a vocal opponent to this president?
I have been. I made 9 pussy hats.
As a feminist, actually, I like this question, if I do say so myself. But as a
By
feminist,
the way, I'm the only person who can tell you that I challenged a legislator, because whenever I went into the presiding officer's office, I would hear him making comments to women that were inappropriate. I'm not saying he attacked them, but just inappropriate, or giving them neck massages. And I called him out. And I called him out in the presence of legislative counsel because I wanted a witness. And I've been loath to say this, although I'm being videotaped and notes taken, because this man recently died. But he said to me, "Get that effing finger out of my face before I break it." And I was so angry, he was quite a bit taller than I was, that I said, go ahead so I could get you on assault charges. But I am passionate about supporting women. Valerie Cartwright, 2 years, I asked her to think about running. She's a smart woman. She actually was working for Fred Brewington, so she was working for the rights of the underdog, and I wanted to see her doing it as a profession, as a public servant, and she's doing a great job as a councilwoman.
this is actually a good segue into this question, which is, does it bother you when people ask the question, is she electable, in regards to female candidates, which it seems men rarely get that question, are they electable? Women get it all the time.
Hey, in Suffolk County, I've gotten it because I'm a Latina woman. Can a Latina be elected in CD1? And I say, give the people of CD1 some credit. Give them some credit. What are we fighting for in Washington? And who do you think is going to fight harder than a Latina who's an immigrant, who understands it? I mean, thank God we came in with papers, so it wasn't that issue, but I knew what it was to be called names.
Why do you think it's only asked of women?
It's asked of women because too many of the people who are running the show behind the scenes are part of a boys' club. And it's unfortunate, because if a woman speaks strongly, she's said to be screeching. if a woman stands up for herself, and I had no problem speaking truth to power, then she's aggressive, not assertive. And those are such old saws. I mean, I'm hearing myself say this, and I was saying this in 1970. In fact, I'm looking at Karen again because we taught in the same school in 1971 when I was teaching speech and debate course. And I had as one of the topics something that was in the paper every day, which was Roe v. Wade. And I was called to the principal's office. I was called to the principal's office. And in the principal's office was the president of the Board of Education, my principal, the assistant principal, an assistant superintendent for curriculum, and me, 22 years old, 110 pounds, and all these men, white men. And I was told, my head's not gonna roll, you can't teach that. And I said to my principal, if you are going to tell my kids that they do not have freedom of speech, then you're gonna tell them, because I won't. I'm teaching a speech and debate course, I won't say that to my kids. So I went back to my classroom, the principal, I threw the door open, and the kids were very nervous because they thought I was gonna be fired. And the principal erased it from the blackboard. And that night, there were people, my classroom was filled, the hall was filled, the courtyard was filled, because women were standing up for a woman, standing up for women. That was 1971, and you would think that in 2018, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And it's heartbreaking. But I can tell you that when I was in the legislature, everyone knew that if there was a piece of legislation before me, I had read it and I had prepared for it. That I didn't have my staff writing my legislation. I researched my legislation and I wrote my well, the council, writes it, but I outlined my legislation. When I did my CO2 legislation, I sat in my office for 6 months with physicists to understand how I was gonna cap CO2 in our power plants. And when Paul Sabatino, who you may have heard of him, very bright man, called me and said, you're gonna have to help me with this, I can't write this legislation, it's too complicated. And I wrote that legislation myself. Women do their homework, because when we're in a position, we have to show our capability. We have to show that we can bear the burden of power, and that we're not going to be shrinking violence. We have to speak truth to power. We have to come in prepared. We have to be willing to fight, and we can't shrink. We have to stand up.
I'm gonna end our interview with this last question, and then we'll turn it over to our members, because we touched on a lot of good progressive issues. But there's a lot of conservative people in the district, and I want to give you the opportunity to tell us how you'll galvanize the district, as well as what could be a divided Congress come 2018, to get the support needed to implement a lot of the things that we talked about.
When I spoke to you about some of the issues earlier, I said I like to listen to people, and I like to meet people where they are. And so when I have spoken with farmers, for example, I didn't know whether they had a D or an R after their names. But I treated them with respect when I introduced them to someone who was from the environmental community and said, we need to lower pesticide and fertilizer use. It wasn't mandated, but I brought in scientists, and we've made it part of our budget to have technicians from Cornell work with our farmers to help them to learn how to do that. By the time I left the legislature, there were over 250 farmers who had joined our agricultural stewardship program. When I speak at Catholic churches about my support and my activity in Planned Parenthood, and I was a board member of Planned Parenthood and had a representative of Planned Parenthood, an educator on my teen pregnancy task force. I talked to Catholics about my having been brought up a Catholic and why that was the real basis of my community service from the time I was a youngster. And so I have great respect for people of faith, whether or not it's my faith, and that understanding that, it's important for them to understand that if they are against abortion, that they should be supporting educators like Planned Parenthood, who probably help, I'm losing a word, I must be getting tired, not have as many, not deter, but
Birth control.
Contraception. Prevent.
prevent, thank you. Thank you, it was prevent, thank you. They probably prevent more abortions than any other organization. And I've spoken with Catholic groups about this. So I try to go, because I know many Latinos who are very Catholic and feel torn, and I tell them, how many Catholics do you know that have 15 kids? So either they're practicing birth control, or they've decided to have a celibate marriage. So let's be honest with one another and say, let's have the right lessons going out there. The point of this, I don't want to get to, I tend to be very verbose, is that listen to people, go where they live. When I first started, my first rally in front of Zeldin's office, someone said to me, well, you know, you're not going to be elected by just Democrats. And I said, and I never have, because it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, blanks, Republicans, Democrats. And I would win with quite a bit over 50%. And 58%, 57%. So I said, why do you ask? And he said, what about us deplorables? And I looked at him and I said, if my daughter were working in your office, would you grab her crotch? That took him aback. And he said, no. And I said, and if someone were limping or stuttering, you would make fun of them? I said, of course not. And a different religion, you wouldn't even let them in the door. He said, no, I wouldn't do it. And I said, then why on earth would you call yourself deplorable? He said, because I'm a working stiff. So I said, I got my working papers when I was 14 years old. And I have never stopped working since. And I got up at 5:30 in the morning for most of my working life. I'm a working stiff. I still carry my nice union card. So what makes you more of a worker than I am? I raised 5 kids and worked full time and made dinner for my family every night because you can't afford to eat out. I was a single divorced mother with 3 children. And I made a loaf of French toast on the weekend so that we could just toast it in the morning before they went to school. So because someone is a college-educated worker, does that make you less of a worker? We get up in the morning and put our pants on one leg at a time and put on our shoes or our boots and work all day. I'm not independently wealthy. We meet people where they live and we speak with them with their own language.
That's a good place to end. Let's turn it over. Patty, go ahead.
Thank you for coming.
Hi, Patty.
We have obviously a bad opioid crisis going on. What would be your plan, you know, if you become the Congresswoman, and what would you do to help us? Because it's obviously a crisis that we have.
You know, one thing about this crisis is that it has turned one thing around. When I first became a legislator, having been a high school teacher for many years, I invited the superintendents of the schools in my district to my office. And I said, we have to get together to talk about the drug situation in our schools. And all 3 said, I'm not going to say that publicly. 1999. 1999. By 2007, it was a crisis, or 6. I mean, it was an acknowledged crisis. And in those same school districts, I was helping to put forums together with our police, with counselors, because education is critical, and as an educator.
Was that like the DARE program?
No, that was after the DARE program. But I believed in the DARE program, but it was an expensive program. I'm just gonna take a sip of water. It's a little dry. We have to put money in rehabilitation. By the way, when I was in the legislature, I supported the drug courts so that people wouldn't go into incarceration who were nonviolent drug offenders and would be incarcerated with rapists and, you know, I feel like Alice's Restaurant mother killers and things. But they were led to treatment, okay? So we must have treatment. We have to invest in treatment because we're incarcerating too many people, which is much more expensive than the treatment, I think. We have to provide education, treatment. We have to fairly enforce our laws. There are people of color who are jailed much more frequently for drug possession than white people. It's just a data piece. So we have to do all of those things. We have to look to, I think, educating our doctors better. Because I had knee surgery. I had a torn meniscus. And the doctor said, well, I'm prescribing Oxycontin, Oxycontin, or one of those. And I said, I really don't like to take them. I don't even like codeine. I'll just take Advil. Well, my husband was working an overnight shift that night, and the doctor got him so nervous about all this excruciating pain I would be in that he said, my husband said, just let him give you the prescription. There were 30 pills. 30 pills. And I said, now, I never took one, by the way, and I had to go to the precinct to turn them in because I wasn't going to flush them down the toilet or throw them in the garbage. They had to be disposed. So that's an education piece. We have to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable just as we did with the tobacco industry, and some of our money will come from those lawsuits. And we can turn that right into rehabilitation. So it's a many-pronged attack, but we just can't call it a war on drugs and call it a day and have a fried egg going into a pan, you know, to tell people not to burn their brains. So it's a multi-pronged issue.
Bernie.
Yes, you had mentioned when you met with Zeldin that he was very charming and personable. And he's a two-time incumbent, and when he won in 2016, he won overwhelmingly. So we talked a little bit about your differences with him relative to immigration, but I'm wondering, in what, you know, certainly within the town of Brookhaven is a very conservative population, where do you see his vulnerabilities? How do you think you can mount a campaign that would defeat him?
Okay, I would really go strong. Well, the immigration issue is one issue that I've already articulated, but he has supported cuts, deep cuts in our environmental protections, in our regulations. And even though he could be parochial about it and say, well, I'm protecting Plum Island, or I don't want drilling off of Long Island. But we're one country, and it's okay to have drilling off of Maine, or, you know, those waters don't have walls between them. So this is one habitat. Regulatory issues. I mean, the air we breathe, I did monitoring of an air study when I had my CO2 bill, and we have pollutants that come from the coal mines in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, because we're by the ocean, and that's the way the wind moves, and the air current brings all of those. So I would hit him very hard on his environmental, the lack of environmental protection. I would hit him very hard, and he got an 8% rating by the League of Conservation Voters. Mine was 100%. So on that. I have to hit him hard on women's issues, very hard on women's issues, because you may not be an ardent feminist, but this is a man who supported that Information Act, which was that a woman was forced to have a sonogram done. He supported that. It never passed eventually, but he was a supporter of that. He's a supporter of this FADA. You know, if people understood the underpinnings of that horrible piece of legislation, he wouldn't seem like such a nice guy. And I think we have to, I would go to him, I would hit him with his own legislation. That's how I would hit him, with his own legislation. And I think when you shine a light on what he has supported, I think people won't see him as such a nice, benevolent guy.
So, I'm not a gun person whatsoever,
Mhm.
but guns are an issue out here.
Yes.
In Suffolk County, and he supports, you know, Second Amendment freedoms, and I'm sure that's gonna be an issue. So,
And boy, I'm dying to hit him on that one. Because he's also part of a party that has been talking about the states having sovereignty. And yet he supported, and I think may have been a co-sponsor, I have to check that reciprocity
There
bill,
was a possibility, yeah. I think he
which
did.
is ceding our power as a state to be the caretakers of the safety of the people in our own state.
A lot more
And of our
dangerous.
police, our police.
Oh, sure.
So it endangers all of us. It endangers all of our safety officers. It's very serious. Why on earth do we need silencers? Why would he support that silencer bill? When we, as a county, have spent a lot of money on the shot spotters. Shot spotters won't work with silencers, I don't think. I'm not, technically that, but I think it's based on the sound of the gun, and then the police are alerted as to, they do the triangulation to where the noise came from, and so that it helps them catch the perpetrator. So, if he's for public safety, these are public safety issues, not Second Amendment issues.
I have a multi-part question, sorry.
If I could just say we usually try to be out of here by 8,
Okay,
so I wanna make sure everybody can answer their questions too.
shorter answers,
Thank
Sonny.
you.
Okay, you ran for supervisor and you lost the race.
Yes.
So, first of all, why do you think you can win a congressional race? But also, why haven't you run for Congress before now? Because you did say that Zeldin was going against the immigrants when he ran against Bishop. Why weren't you stirred somehow?
Well, because I wasn't gonna primary a sitting Democratic congressman. Tim Bishop was there.
Right.
And Tim Bishop was supporting
Right.
immigrant rights. I wanna get to the Romaine race, okay?
But you've had a lapse of time in
Mhm.
between, and what have you done in between then?
Mhm.
Why haven't you, seen what's going on in Suffolk
Mhm.
County politics, so why
Because.
just end with your term limit?
Right, I was term limited, as you have just said. My assemblyman is a Democrat. My sitting congressman is a Democrat. My county executive is a Democrat, okay? All Democrats when I was term limited. But I wanna get to the Romaine race because that's very important. You just saw a lot of people go out and work on the Brookhaven town races,
A lot of people in this room did.
and they didn't get any better a percentage than I did, okay? They got about the same votes. And I'll tell you with my race, and this was an open secret among people who were in the party, there had already been an agreement that no one was going to challenge Ed Romaine because if he didn't run against the county executive. And my feeling is the voters had to have a choice. And so I threw myself into that race with no help from the party, with no help from the committee people who work for the party, you know, in county government. So I did the race on a shoestring simply because I wanted to give people a vote. I don't believe that we should play with the franchise of our citizens. And they were not going to challenge Ed Romaine. And I decided to challenge him. When I ran a county-wide race, I lost by 2 points. I didn't get the independence line, and it gave my opponent those 2 points. You know, the independence line brought in 2 points. So I did well in a county-wide race. I left the legislature. I felt I had done a good job. I thought Tim Bishop was doing a good job. I didn't really feel that I would have a good chance with Flanagan because he goes way west of my district, which wasn't really my bailiwick, and my base. And I wanted to spend time, you know, when you leave something because of a term limit or a retirement, you want to look at the landscape a little bit. And as I said, I ran against Romaine because I didn't think he should run unopposed. But I served on the board of Planned Parenthood, on the board of the March of Dimes. I volunteered to serve on my own food policy council. So I did, and I was teaching ESL. So I now have a life. So no apologies. I saw the need here.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on Bernie's point. One of the mysteries to me about Zeldin's support in this district is he is so much more right-wing than the district is. I mean, he is way to the right. He was Trump before Trump.
Yes.
We had a Democratic congressman for 12 years.
Yes.
And you brought up the main point. Most people just don't know how he votes.
That's right.
They don't know just how right-wing he is.
Yes.
How are you gonna break through that? Because he's really slick. I mean, I went to his one town hall, I've been on his, you know, telephone town halls, and you listen to his supporters just praising him.
I know.
And they are oblivious of his real voting record. But he has a lot of money. He's gonna flood the airways with, you know, a lot of ads. What would be your plan, how to do exactly what you just said, to shine a light on what his real voting record is?
Well, I have a great weapon that he doesn't have. I have the people who have seen just how ugly things can get and have risen up. And have risen up with really great indignation and righteousness. And I think that if we have myself or one of the other progressive candidates, we are going to rise up and beat him. And the difference between myself and my other very progressive candidates is that I have walked the walk. I can show you a piece of Zeldin legislation and put a piece of my legislation on the local level that matches dead set against it. So I have the passion, I have the belief, I have the courage, and I have the record. And I certainly have the values that we need to beat Lee Zeldin. And I have you guys. I have you guys. I want all your hats out. I want, you know, boots on the ground. It's boots on the ground, and we're going to tell Lee Zeldin and Rich Schaefer that the people have a voice. We really have to do that in this race.
I think if we don't do it this race, it's not gonna happen either.
This is the moment. This is the moment.
It's always the moment.
Anybody else like to ask a question of Vivian before we?
Yes.
Sharon.
I'd just like to say that we had a meeting a while back where we went around the room and asked what we were looking for in a candidate. And I'm getting emotional because I haven't felt passion from anyone else who has spoke to us before you've come, Vivian. And that's what I want that in a candidate, and I want a woman.
By the way, I give myself 2 hours a week where I say I'm not gonna think about this. And that's on Wednesday afternoon between 1 and 3, I play mahjong with a group of women. Because you've gotta look at those tiles and focus. And, you know, they get worried about me sometimes because they say, how do you do this? How do you do this? It's because of that. Because that happens to me in the supermarket. It happens to me at the post office with people who know me because I was a legislator, or maybe our kids played ball together, will hug me in the street and say thank you. Okay? Because you have to, not because I'm so great, but because they're so hungry for the change. And that's what made me run. My son just had a baby in California. You don't know how, well, his wife. That baby's only 4 pounds, 7 ounces. And how badly I wanted to jump on a plane yesterday and just go there. I knew that my son's mother-in-law was there. So it was about me, it wasn't about them. If it had been about them, I would have left no matter what you people would say about it. But it's hard when you run, but it's wonderful when you run. Because people say to me, oh my God, I get so depressed. And I say, but you know what? I get uplifted all the time. Because people are talking about their hopes. And that's what democracy is about. Because your vote is vote and hope are spelled very similarly, you know? And that's what we're doing, right? We're hoping. We're hoping for change. We're hoping for a difference. And what the most important thing that we're doing is we're believing in our system. We're believing that if we turn the Congress around, we can make Trump accountable, we can turn the ship around, and we can go in the right direction. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you for coming. Oh, we'll take one more.
I just want to say that Lee Zeldin has this very cherubic face, but I think that actually one way to look at him is like the picture of Dorian Gray. What is really behind that cherubic face? And what it is truly almost evil. Because if you bring guns in from out of state, that will kill more people than MS-13 gang members. If you pretend that you're against the loss of SALT deductions, you're still going to vote for the Republican, who is going to be making sure that New York State suffers, because the bill was intended to make the state of New York suffer. And so I think that a very direct attack on the fact that he is not what he seems to be, this sweet young man.
Absolutely.
The conscience, the
It's a
Fodder
thing.
bill is a conscience clause thing, which doesn't just apply to bakers not baking cakes.
No.
Or pharmacists not giving women
Birth control.
birth control. It can apply to anything.
Absolutely.
And there is a legislator in Illinois who wants to enjoin the state of Illinois from getting any health care fund because his constitutional rights to a conscience not to perform an abortion or facilitate abortion would be harmed. It has enormous impact. It's meant to be enormous. And I want to thank you about what you said about Kate Browning, because I'm on the board of a New York State reproductive rights organization, and I did not know that about her. So I'm very happy to know that about her, and thank
It's
you for that.
important. And you know, some people have said to me, well, I don't like that you're mudslinging. And I said, no, I'm telling you about someone's record. You know, I'm not calling her names, that's her record.
Yeah.
And I think you should know. I just said, I'm going to, hoist him on his own petard, on his own record. Because that's the clean way to say, this is what he is doing. You have a right to know the man's record, and you have a right to know Kate's record, you have a right to know my record, and I'd be happy to share it with you.
When you refer to Kate's record, you didn't share with them something, as a longtime feminist myself, the idea that someone said, oh, you two are getting into a cat fight when you disagreed with Kate on issues. So it still rears its ugly head, even today, with a female candidate.
Worse than that, he didn't even say that, he said, meow.
But you didn't bring up that some of the other candidates belong to other parties. What about
I know David Pachevsky had been in the Green Party for a while, but the Green Party isn't contrary to all of the values that we're talking about here, and women's access to health is a very important value that we share, and I think the Green Party agrees with that. I think that Elaine Damasi might have been an independent for, I don't know which other party, I think she
was
mentioned
another
that.
party, I'm not sure which
I
one.
thought she was an independent for a while, but see, I don't have a direct cause and effect or a record to put on them. I have seen, and the reason I've mentioned this is because people ask me, well, you're both legislators, what's the difference? So I feel compelled to say, we're the two people with a record. So we're the two people that I can tell you that. But I do know that Dave Pachevsky, and he openly has told people that he was a member of the Green Party because he found it was his only way to be competitive against other Democrats in New York City. I mean, not that I'm his advocate, but I'm just answering honestly. Any other questions? Hi, Greg. I think we're about to break up.
I think so. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Tell your friends.
We need a picture.
Can we end our conversation?
I hope you're gonna edit some of that because I do get talkative.
No, we throw it up and
Don't edit it.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay. Well, Richard.
Yeah, I'm gonna sign up. Yeah, I wanna sign up.
Sharon Adams.
I share that back.
Thank you, Karen. This is the sign up.
You're very impressive.
She works so poised. Me too. Okay, all right, I'll give you a call. Thank you, yes.
So long, Judy.
How are you feeling?
Anybody who'd like to be in the picture with us, want to come here?
Yeah. Are they being posted on Facebook or a different site? Or both?
Good.